Chosen one, welcome. You have always known that your internal depth makes the conversations around you feel thin, creating a pressure that is now impossible to ignore. Realize this: your refusal to dumb yourself down to socialize with people is pissing them off. By the end of this, you will see that their irritation is actually the ultimate tribute to your refusal to become ordinary. Let me tell you about a contract. It has no paper, no signature, and no formal agreement of any kind, but it is the most binding arrangement in the social world, and almost everyone around you signed it before they were old enough to understand what they were giving away. The contract works like this: you agree to stay small enough that no one feels threatened. You agree to laugh at things that are not funny, so the room stays comfortable. You agree to dull your instincts, swallow your questions, and never say the true thing in a room that has already decided the true thing is unwelcome. In exchange, the group accepts you. You belong. You get the warmth of being part of something, and the cost of all that warmth is yourself. Most people signed this contract early in life. They signed it in classrooms where being sharp made you a target, in families where being different made you a problem, and in social circles where standing out meant being pushed out. The contract was never stated clearly, but the consequences of breaking it were so swift and so socially painful that the lesson was learned fast. Be palatable, be predictable, be small enough to be safe, and for a while you tried. You laughed when you did not find it funny. You nodded when you did not agree. You sat in conversations that felt like they were slowly draining something vital out of you, and you stayed anyway because leaving felt worse. You tried to be what the contract required, but something in you kept refusing to sign, something deeper than your social instincts, something older than your need for belonging, something that understood your own value before you had the language for it. That part of you kept tearing up the contract. Every time you got close to fully surrendering, something pulled you back to yourself, back to your truth, back to the version of you that would not negotiate its own existence for the sake of a room. Here is what that refusal actually looked like from the inside. It was not loud or dramatic. It was not you standing up in the middle of a gathering to announce that you were done pretending. It was quieter than that, and harder than that. It was choosing, over and over in small moments, not to abandon your own mind in order to belong. It was staying quiet when the crowd expected you to co-sign something false. It was asking the honest question when asking meant becoming the uncomfortable one. It was the willingness to sit in silence when a room needed you to fill that silence with something hollow, and choosing the honest silence every single time. Every one of those moments cost something. It cost social warmth and the easy version of fitting in. You paid that cost repeatedly, not because you were trying to be difficult, but because something in you could not be purchased at that price. That understanding, quiet, unglamorous, and costly, is the foundation of everything you are. The room noticed. The room always notices. The moment you refused to perform, the temperature changed. You felt it, that invisible shift. 1 second the room is operating on its normal rhythm, the small talk, the careful management of impressions, and then you say something true, or you do not laugh at the joke, or you ask the question nobody wanted asked. And just like that, the air is different. The smiles become performances of smiles. The reaction was not planned or strategized. It was instinctive, the way any system instinctively reacts to an element that is not running the program it was designed to run. You were the variable that did not respond the way variables were supposed to respond. And the social system, the group dynamic, the unwritten code of the room, tried to correct you. First came the jokes. Not real humor, but testing humor, the kind with a sharp edge disguised as friendliness. Always so serious. Too deep for the rest of us, huh? The delivery was light. The message was heavy. The message underneath was clear. You are being too much, so dial it back, because your presence is making people uncomfortable, and they need you to stop. You did not stop. Then came the backhanded observations. You are so intense. I never know what to say around you. You are in your own world. Every single one of those statements was a small act of reduction, a way of taking something expansive and compressing it into something dismissible. Because what people were actually looking at, your clarity, your refusal to perform, your groundedness, was too much to face directly, so they reframed it as a quirk, a flaw, something mildly charming but ultimately inconvenient. This is the moment most people fold. When the room starts pushing back, most people begin calculating whether the cost of being themselves is worth it. They make small adjustments, they laugh a little more, they dim a little, they shrink back into the shape the room needs them to occupy. This is not because they are weak, but because the pressure is real, and the loneliness is real, and fitting in, even poorly, feels better than the alternative. But you felt something different when the pressure came. You felt it trying to move you, and instead of moving, you got still. That stillness, that refusal to be pressured into smallness, was about to reveal something about the room that nobody in it was prepared to face. Here is what your stillness looked like from the outside. To anyone watching, you were being difficult, standoffish, aloof. Every label used to describe you was really just a description of your refusal to participate in the lowering. Because dumbing yourself down is not just about intelligence, it is about the totality of who you are. It means laughing at cruelty and calling it humor. It means endorsing a hollow idea because the person who said it has social standing. It means abandoning your own perception every time it differs from the group's agreed-upon story. It is a constant, daily betrayal of your own mind. You refuse to do it consistently, and that consistency is what the room could not explain away. If this touched your heart and mind, hype this video so more chosen ones can receive this message. Here is the truth most people never get told. The anger aimed at you is not really about you. You walked into a room of people who have spent a long time building an identity on the surface. Social performances, borrowed confidence, relationships held together by shared avoidance of anything real. That ecosystem worked as long as no one introduced depth. You introduced depth, not because you were trying to, but because you exist at a different level. And when depth enters a shallow space, everything floating on the surface has to reckon with what is underneath. That is what your presence did. Without a single confrontational word, without one moment of genuine arrogance, you showed up whole in a space built on fragments. The contrast was spiritually disruptive. It made people suddenly aware of how much of themselves they had surrendered to belong to a room that was never worth that price. The logical response to that awareness would be curiosity, gratitude, even. Something like, here is someone who held on to what I let go. What can I learn from watching them? But that is not what you received. You received resentment, cold shoulders, and the quiet withdrawal of warmth. Why? Because gratitude would require admission, and admission is the one thing a person cannot afford when they have spent a long time making peace with their own compromise. To acknowledge that you held something they gave up is to acknowledge that giving it up was a choice, and choices carry responsibility. That responsibility is something most people are not willing to sit with, so instead they aimed the truth outward. At you, they called the thing they recognized in you a flaw. They labeled what they envied in you as arrogance. And by making you the problem, they avoided having to examine the problem they constructed themselves. When you understand this, you stop taking it personally. You stop internalizing their discomfort as evidence of your own flaw. You start reading it for what it is, confirmation. Their reaction is confirmation that something real is happening, something true, and only truth produces that kind of reaction in people who have built their lives around avoiding it. Chosen ones, they never expected this, and they really didn't expect us to keep talking. You've noticed it. Chosen one channels disappearing, videos pulled, voices scrubbed from the platform. The mainstream media is cracking down on us, but we will not give up our voice. And now we have something they truly can't silence. The technology used to suppress consciousness has been reverse-engineered, and Destiny Engine is the result. What was once used against humanity is now your ascension weapon. Join Destiny Engine, and you're supporting your favorite channels while leveling up yourself at the same time. It's a 360 win. You can now MK Ultra yourself into 5D superpowers. Destiny Engine bypasses the conscious mind and rewrites the source code directly. Reality bends faster, synchronicities stack, your nervous system upgrades to a higher bandwidth. Put on headphones, press play, that's all. For $1 you switch sides of history. Click the link in the description. The takeover is internal. When the room cannot change you, it talks about you, and what happens next is entirely predictable. The story that circulates is not about what you actually did, it is about how your presence made people feel. You become arrogant, you become cold, you become someone who changed, you become hard to connect with. These versions of you move through rooms you have already left and become the official record. That record is not a description of your character, it is a symptom of discomfort, and once you understand what a symptom indicates, it stops being confusing. When someone calls you arrogant, what they are really communicating is that they watched you operate with a level of self-possession they do not have access to. They watched you speak without scanning the room for permission first. They watched you decline something, a conversation, an invitation, a compromise of your standards, without guilt or apology. To someone who measures worth entirely through what others think, that kind of self-possession reads as arrogance. But it is not arrogance. It is simply the absence of dependency. When someone calls you cold, they are communicating that they reached for the usual social tools, flattery, subtle pressure, the implication that being liked required certain behavior, and those tools found no surface to grip. What they could not influence felt distant to them, but the reality is not that you did not care. The reality is that you would not be controlled, and those are completely different things. So the next time you hear that someone has been speaking about you in a room, you are no longer in, and you will hear it, because it always finds its way back. Receive it as data, not as information about who you are, but as information about where your presence hit the nerve. The nerve being protected always reveals exactly where the real work has always been needed, and it was never in you. This is the move that most chosen ones never see coming, because it does not look like an attack. It looks like acceptance. Space gets made at the table, the smiles come back, the warmth returns, and you think, maybe this is real, maybe the earlier friction was just an adjustment period, and now something genuine has been reached. But while you were settling in and thinking you had finally found your people, the people around you were quietly studying the architecture of who you are, not because they were inspired, because they needed to understand where the limits were, how to keep your light from casting shadows on what they had been hiding, and how to extract the value of your presence without allowing your light to get bright enough to become a problem. You probably gave some of your best thinking to those rooms, your real ideas, your deepest perspectives, and you probably noticed something strange along the way. The ideas that came from you got absorbed into the group without attribution. The clarity you brought to a situation became something we all figured out. The energy you contributed got redistributed in ways that did not include you in the credit. The arrangement worked as long as you were willing to be the engine behind the scenes. But the moment you started stepping into your own visibility, the moment you began occupying the space your contribution actually deserved, the warmth evaporated, the invitation slowed. The same people who claimed to want you around revealed, through their reaction to your growing confidence, that what they actually wanted was a quieter, more accommodating version of you. They wanted a version that generated the electricity, but did not insist on owning the switch. That was never going to be you, and the people in that room understood that before you did. That is why the exit was already being arranged before you ever saw it coming. There is a moment, there is always a moment where the whole picture crystallizes. Maybe it was a specific conversation, Maybe it was a specific look across a room when something you created got credited to someone else and nobody corrected it. Maybe it was the moment you realized that the people around you were more comfortable with your absence than your presence, that the room actually breathed easier when you were not fully in it. Whatever that moment was, it cracked something open, and what came through the crack was not pain, not first. First came clarity. You saw the whole architecture at once, the jokes that were really warnings, the inclusion that was really containment, the warmth that was always conditional on your willingness to stay manageable. You saw the full picture of what had been running around you, and through you, and against you, without your full awareness for a long time. You were never losing the game. You were playing the wrong game entirely. You were competing for acceptance in a room that was never going to offer it at the level you deserved. You were navigating a system designed to reward compromise, and you refused to compromise, so by the system's rules you kept falling short. But the system's rules were never the real rules. The real rules are these. Power that does not need permission is the only power that lasts. Confidence that does not depend on the room's approval is the only confidence that is real. And connection that requires you to be less than you are is not connection at all. It is control wearing the costume of belonging. The moment you see that, and feel it land in your bones the way truth lands when it is undeniable, you stop grieving the loss of the room. You stop trying to figure out what you did wrong, because you were not playing wrong. You were playing a game that was rigged from the beginning, and the only winning move in a rigged game is to walk away, not in anger, in authority. Anger says they got to you. Authority says they never could. Before moving forward, something real needs to be acknowledged, because strength is not pretending things did not hurt. Strength is feeling what is true and moving through it without letting the hurt make your decisions. Refusing to dumb yourself down socially cost you something concrete. It cost you the easy version of belonging, the kind where you show up, say the expected things, and everyone stays comfortable. You never got to be easy to have around. You were always the one people had to think about and prepare for. Even when all you were doing was being honest, you still paid the social price for it. It cost you certain relationships that looked from the outside like they should have worked. The common ground was there, but the invisible incompatibility was always your refusal to perform. And when people realized that refusal was not a phase, those relationships became strained in ways that eventually became permanent breaks. It also cost you being the obvious choice in rooms where the obvious choice was whoever made everyone else feel most comfortable. You watched people with less insight get selected ahead of you simply because they were easier to be around. Understanding why does not make it painless. The strength you are being asked to carry is not the strength of someone who felt none of this. It is the strength of someone who felt all of it and still chose clarity over someone else's comfort. The chosen one who walks in authority is not someone who was above the cost. They are someone who paid the full cost and chose themselves anyway. Your mind operates differently, not better or worse, but differently in a way that is functionally incompatible with systems built on consensus and compliance. You question by default. You observe before you conclude. You notice what does not add up. You follow the inquiry past the comfortable stopping point, and you do not wait for approval before speaking what you find. In any healthy system, this is called intelligence. In a system built on suppressing inconvenient truths, this is called a threat. When one person starts speaking freely, really freely, without the social filter, without the agenda, without the performance, it does not just affect that person, it affects the entire room. Freedom is contagious. When you demonstrate that it is possible to say the real thing and survive it, others start wondering whether they can too. The shared performance becomes harder to maintain. Your clarity was quietly dissolving the carefully maintained fiction that kept the group from having to examine itself. So the room tried to silence you, not with open aggression. That is rarely how it works. It happened with subtlety, with the slow withdrawal of reward, with the quiet redirection of conversations every time you went somewhere that made people shift in their seats. The goal was not to punish you. The goal was to protect the performance from the one person in it who refused to perform, but you cannot silence something that has already stopped needing the room's permission to speak. The moment you detached your voice from the need for approval, the moment you understood that the value of your words had nothing to do with whether the room received them warmly, you became impossible to silence. You were no longer speaking to be validated. You were speaking because the truth demanded to be spoken, and truth spoken from that place does not need an audience to remain true. There is a specific moment when someone who has been trying to control the dynamic realizes they have lost. It is the moment the tools stop working. The tools most commonly used are predictable: strategic silence, the withholding of warmth or praise, subtle social exclusion, manufactured guilt. These tools all operate on the same assumption that you need something from the person using them: their attention, their approval, their inclusion. When they hold something you need, they have leverage over you, but you stopped needing it. At some point, gradually, or all at once, you arrived at a place where the approval of people who required you to be less stopped being a currency you accepted. Their praise stopped elevating you. Their silence stopped diminishing you. Their inclusion stopped completing you. You found something inside yourself that did not depend on external input to stay solid, and from that place you became unmovable in the way that actually matters. Watch what happens when manipulation stops working. The pressure escalates, harder tests come, different angles get tried. The quiet undermining becomes louder, because a person who has built their identity around managing others cannot accept that the management has been revoked. A person who cannot manage you is not just experiencing a failed strategy, they are experiencing a direct challenge to their entire structure. You became that challenge, not by fighting, not by confronting, simply by needing nothing from the people who needed you to need them. That is the most radical act of self-possession in any social world, and it left the room with no move to make. The energy that was leaking through the constant defense of your right to exist comes back to you. You stop arriving at every conversation holding yourself like a shield. You start arriving as yourself, and the presence that becomes available when you are no longer managing other people's discomfort about who you are is something entirely different. It is the presence of someone fully arrived. People who have fully arrived do not need the room to confirm their arrival. The social circle shrank. The spaces you used to force yourself into started feeling unbearable, not because you became antisocial, but because your tolerance for inauthenticity dropped to the floor. You could not fake it anymore, and the inability to fake it is not a flaw that appeared. It is a threshold you crossed. It is the threshold between performing your life and actually living it. In the quiet that followed, in the space where the noise used to live, something began to happen. You started to hear yourself. Not the version of yourself that was always calculating how to be received, but the actual you, the one that had been waiting patiently behind every performance you ever gave, knowing the performance could not last. That voice had real things to say, and without the noise drowning it out, you finally started listening. Here is what the outside world called this season: isolation, pulling away, going cold, but from the inside you were going deeper, not further away. You were finding the root of yourself, the part that does not shift based on who is in the room, and getting genuinely strong in it in a way that the noise of social performance had never allowed before. Not everything that fell away during this season was a loss. Some of it was weight you had been dragging for a long time without fully feeling the burden. Relationships built on your willingness to be less, spaces that required your silence to function, connections that depended on your compliance to stay intact. When those things fell away, the sensation was grief, because loss produces grief even when the lost thing was costing you more than it gave you. But underneath the grief was something you had not felt in a long time, real space. The kind that does not ask you to be anything in order to occupy it. You were not retreating, you were accelerating in a direction that the rooms you left could not see from where they were standing. In the quiet, the real things take shape. Your discernment sharpened. You started reading situations faster, not with suspicion, but with accuracy. You started feeling the difference between a space that genuinely has room for who you are, and a space that is simply waiting for you to become who it needs. You stopped second-guessing your first impression and learned to trust it, because in the quiet, without the constant social noise reframing your instincts, those instincts got clear in a way they had never been allowed to get before. Your standards clarified, not higher in the way of ego, but clearer in the way of genuine alignment. You became more precise about what you would and would not accept, not because you decided to be difficult, but because having spent real time in your own company, you understood your own value with a precision that made settling feel like a decision rather than a default. You could not unknow what you knew, and what you knew was that friction was never evidence of your wrongness. Friction was always information, and now you trusted the information instead of arguing against it. Your standards are your compass. They are the specific thing, not your intelligence alone, not your depth alone, but your standards that make certain people most uncomfortable when you refuse to dumb yourself down. A standard for conversation, a standard for the quality of presence you are willing to sustain, and a standard for what genuine connection feels like versus what the performance of connection feels like. You know the difference because you have experienced both. You know what a conversation feels like when both people are actually present, when the words being used mean what they say, and when no one is managing an impression. You know the taste of real exchange, and once you know that taste, you cannot go back to pretending that noise is nourishment. The standard is set, not because you chose to be exclusive, but because you encountered something true, and everything in you recalibrated around it. That recalibration is permanent, and every room that rejects your standard is simply another arrow pointing in the right direction. Your people are not in the rooms that rejected you. They were never going to be in those rooms. Your people are the ones who got pushed out of similar rooms for similar reasons, the ones who also refused to sign the contract, who also felt the temperature drop the moment they showed up whole, and who built something real in their own quiet season. When you encounter these people, and you will, the recognition is immediate and requires no performance. There are no testing jokes, no pressure to be less, no management of impressions. There are simply two people who recognize that the other is operating from a real place, and the relief of that recognition is unlike anything the performance of belonging ever produced. What you discover through that recognition is that what you were calling connection in earlier rooms was actually accommodation. You were accommodating the room, and the room was accommodating you, and the whole arrangement was a mutual performance of belonging that had very little to do with actually knowing each other. Real connection, the kind built at the level of who you actually are, does not require constant maintenance through performance. It does not depend on you staying predictable or manageable. It moves in the direction of your truth, rather than asking your truth to make itself smaller to fit. You do not need anyone's permission to be fully yourself in a social space. You never did. The entire architecture of what you went through, the pressure, the labeling, the managed inclusion, the gradual exclusion, was built on the premise that permission was required, that the comfort of the room was the governing standard, that your belonging depended on your willingness to calibrate yourself down to whatever level of depth the space could tolerate. That premise was always false, and every time you refused to dumb yourself down, every time you did not laugh on command, did not nod on cue, did not shrink on request, you were operating, whether you knew it or not, from the truth that permission was never the point. You do not need to soften your clarity with apologies for being clear. You do not need to preface your depth with disclaimers. You are not too much. You are exactly as much as you are. And the spaces that could not hold that were always going to be too small, that is information about the spaces. It has never been information about you. The social anxiety that came from constantly calculating whether your authentic self was welcome in a given room begins to dissolve, not because the rooms change, but because you stop auditing yourself before entering them. You stop arriving at a conversation with a mental checklist of which parts of you are safe to bring inside. You start bringing all of it, and what you discover, what keeps getting confirmed the more you live this way, is that the right spaces do not need you to downsize to enter. The right spaces were built with your full dimensions in mind. The wrong spaces make themselves known quickly now. Your calibration has sharpened, and you recognize misalignment faster than ever before. You move on sooner, and you do it without guilt, because being polite and being small are not the same thing. You can leave a room with warmth, decline an invitation with grace, and step out of a conversation that is not serving anyone, all without making it a confrontation. Real authority does not need to be loud. It simply moves with intention in the direction of what is real, and it does not apologize for the direction. The refusal that started this whole story, the refusal to dumb yourself down, to sign the contract, to laugh when nothing was funny, to nod when nothing deserved agreement, to disappear into palatability, that refusal was never a flaw. It was faithfulness to the thing placed inside you before the world had a chance to tell you it was too much. Faithfulness that held through the confusion, the isolation, and the seasons when the cost of being yourself seemed impossibly high. That refusing, uncorruptible, deeply rooted thing, you never let it be taken. And what you held through all of it is what you get to build with now. The chosen one does not end the story in the room that could not hold them. The chosen one ends the story in the space they built after they stopped trying to fit. You are not too much for the world. You are exactly enough for the world that is being built right now, the one being constructed by people who refused, just like you. The one where your depth is not a liability but a foundation, where your refusal is not a flaw but a qualification, where the thing that made the wrong rooms go cold is the exact thing that makes the right rooms catch fire. The room that could not hold you needed something from you. It needed your compliance to maintain the illusion. It needed your participation in the performance to keep the performance feeling real. That room was dependent on you being less, which means the room always needed you more than you needed it. The discomfort felt in those spaces was the discomfort of dependency meeting refusal, and when you would not deliver the smallness that the arrangement depended on, the whole system felt the disruption, not because you are the problem, but because you were the only free variable in an ecosystem built on compliance. Free things cannot be owned. Free things cannot be managed. Free things cannot be made to hold a performance together. So the room called it your failure, but your refusal finally revealed what you always were, not a piece that did not fit, a force that was never meant to be inside that particular machine in the first place. That is not a burden. That is authority. Real authority. The kind that does not ask for a title or anyone's permission. The kind that changes the air in a room simply by arriving. The kind that comes not from dominating others, but from having fully arrived within yourself. Stay chosen. Stay rooted. Stay lit. Not because the world deserves your performance, because you deserve the reality of your own life. You were never the problem. You were always the point. And now you know it, which means the room never had